Hey there. So this time around, the assignment is going to be based on functions. We talked about functions and we talked about the inputs and outputs that they produce, inputs that they take and outputs that they produce. The inputs to a function are essentially called parameters, and the return is essentially a return type. The value that you will be returning from within the function should match the type that you have defined in the signature. And signature is essentially just the return type, the name of the function, the parenthesis, and any parameters in between with a semicolon. Remember, if you want to define a function below the main function, then you have to ensure that you have a signature at the very top. Otherwise, you can just define everything in the top. So let's look at the assignment this time. Okay, so the assignment this time is pretty straightforward. Essentially, you are supposed to create a bicycle or an abstraction of a bicycle. So bicycle in software. And I'm going to be talking about this in a pretty straightforward manner. So essentially, our bicycle has front gear, so you will have essentially variables. These will be global variables, and you will have a variable called front gear, and then there will be one called rear gear, and the front gears can be values 1, 2, or 3. And the front gear, when they go numbers 1, 2, and 3, they have the gear 1 has 30 teeth, gear 2 has 60 teeth, and gear 3 has 90 teeth. Okay, and then rear gear will have values 1, 2, all the way till 7. So this is a 7-speed bike, like 21 speed bike total, like 3 multiplied by 7. If you don't know that, then just I'm telling you that a 21 speed bike has 3 gears in the front and 7 in the back. So, and this will actually start at 10 gears. Gear number 2 will have 15 gears, 15 teeth. Number 1 has 10 teeth, 15 has second has 15 teeth, all the way where you can have 40 teeth here. Okay, 15, 20, 25, and so on and so forth, up to 40 teeth here. So essentially, these are the teeth. So when you start, your bike will have front gear will be set to gear 1, and the rear gear will be set to 1 again. Okay, so your gear ratio essentially will be gear ratio is the rear gear divided by front gear. In actual mechanical terms, this is driven gear by driver gear. So this is the gear ratio essentially. Okay, this is gear ratio. So now that will be given, and then you will be given the wheel diameter. Wheel diameter, there will be a variable with that name, so you know how much distance is covered in a single rotation. Okay, and then there will be another variable called RPM, which is rotations per minute. If this is too hard, then you can always go to rotations per second or whatever. So the speed of the bike will be essentially like if we look at RPM, then it's like 60 rotations of the wheel in wait, hold on. When we say RPM for a bike, that's how fast you are pedaling. RPM is also called the pedaling speed. Okay, so let's say you are pedaling at, let's say 10 rotations per minute. So now, and you are in, let's say, the first gear in the front is number 1, and in the rear you are in gear number essentially like let's say 2 in the rear. So your gear ratio is essentially like the driven gear is 15 and the driver gear is 30. So this is like 0.5 essentially. So what that means is essentially this is actually inverse. So what will happen is your pedaling speed, when you are pedaling at some speed, the 0.5 ratio means your actual speed will become double. Okay, because this is the front gear, this is the the rear gear, and you're driving. So one rotation of this, since this has 30 teeth and this only has 15 teeth, one rotation of this one is going to cause like two rotations of this thing. So your speed is like your RPM in the rear is going to become double. So you will essentially have like the rear speed will be like 20 RPM essentially. The rear gear will spin at this 20 RPM. Since this is directly connected to the tire, right? You will have something like the actual distance covered will be 20 multiplied by 2 pi r, or I should say this is pi into diameter, right? So this is the distance covered, right? So the speed will essentially be this above, which is like 20 multiplied by pi multiplied by diameter divided by the time, which is 60. This was a minute, right? We are giving rotations per minute. So this will be speeds in meters per second. Okay, so now coming back, like how does this all actually get together? You have variables for I'm going to just go over this one more time. You have a variable for front gear, the rear gear, which gear you are in. You have one for wheel diameter, and you have one for RPM, the front RPM. Okay, your job is essentially to write functions that do the following. One will be essentially like let me go over here, set gear front. Okay, and this will set the front gear. Remember, the front gears are only 1, 2 or 3, and then there will be another one saying set rear gear. This will be starting like all the way till 7, and then you will have another one saying set RPM, and this will set the variable called RPM internally. So these are global variables, so you can access them from within your functions, and so you should be easily able to shift them, change them. And then after this, what happens is every time you change after once the program starts, your global variables have will have some default values, as in initially the initial front gear will be at gear 1, the initial rear gear will be at gear 1 again, and initial RPM you can set at 0. Okay, because in the beginning the bike is not really moving. So let's say you will have a big loop, which will essentially, this loop will print like please enter option, please enter option, and the options are going to be like it will be like not this, it will be F as in change front gear, R as in change rear gear, or M for change RPM. This is change front gear. This one is change rear gear, and this is change the RPM. Okay, and the another one will be like whoops, another one will be for V for get velocity or speed. Okay, and then there will be one saying P, which will be like print all the information, as in print all the information, what is the what the front gear is, what the rear gear is, what the RPM is, and what the current speed is. Okay, so these are the 4 things. So it will keep asking, whoops, let me go back to my this thing over here, erase this thing here. So your loop will ask, then you will enter one of these, like F, R, M, V or P. You will enter one of these, and then you are going to get asked, like if you for example, if you ask for change front gear, then you will ask for what's the new gear that you want, and once you get the new gear, you are going to use your function set set, what was that, set gear front or set gear front or rear, to set the variable, the global variable, like that. Okay, you are not supposed to directly change the global variable. You'll use the function to do that. Okay, and your functions will actually have a signature, as in the set front gear will actually set let me actually go back. Anyway, so that will actually change. I will tell you the signatures in a second. So you will have set gear front and set gear rear, and similarly you will have set gear RPM. Oh, sorry, not set gear, just set RPM. And then the V as in get velocity and P print, these are actually, they will just print the current state. So essentially these are the signatures that you will have. you will have bool set uh, set gear front. Okay, and this will be int gear. That's the signature for the front one. Then you will have bool set gear rear int gear. This is for the rear one. Okay, and then you will have void or how about this, instead of void let's just say bool set rpm. Okay, and there will be again int rpm. Okay, now here's the key thing that you should remember. The gears have to be one, front gear have to be 1, 2 or 3. The rear gears have to be 1, 2 all the way till 7. They cannot be anything else. So make sure when the input comes in, you check whether the value is actually valid. Like, if let's say I entered 5, then 5 is not a valid gear. If I enter a valid gear, you should return true over here. If I enter an invalid gear, return false over here, and do not change the gear. The same thing over here in the rear. If 1 to 7 you return, you enter, then the user enters, then you say return true and change the gear. If the guy returns 0 or 8 or something like that, then again return false. And in the set rpm, again the rpms can be 0 all the way to, let's say, something like 60 rpm. A guy is going at it, they are turning it once every second, but more than 60 is not possible. A human leg would probably start having issues. So 60 rpm is the max. Make sure you check the value of the parameters, and if it actually doesn't compute, then return a false value. Now the other two, v is essentially the this one, get velocity or speed. There are these two other functions that you have to write. Get velocity, this will be void get velocity, and it will not take any parameters. This will be empty here, right? That's its signature, and it should compute the speed based on the formula that I gave earlier. Compute speed and print it, and then final will be print info, and this will be again a void function, and this one should print everything, your for example, your front gear is blah blah, your rear gear is something else, and all the way rpm, speed, etc. Okay, and this should keep on running in a loop over and over and over and over, with really no exit. I don't want you to exit. So anyway, finish the assignment, and I'll see you later.